Hello, I'm Indu Dogra, and today I'm going to talk to you about the city Dionysia, that is, the feast of Eleutherius Dionysus, which ultimately led to the evolution of Greek theatre. It was far the most splendid of the Bacchic festivals and was therefore also called the Great Dionysia or simply the Dionysia without any additional epithet. Right from the beginning, it was held within the precincts of the city, in the sacred enclosure of Eleutherius on the south of the Acropolis, where the remains of the great Athenian theatre are still to be seen. Hence, the origin of the name city Dionysia to distinguish it from the Anthesteria and the Lania, which were celebrated at any rate during the earliest period in a district outside the walls. For the same reason, a victory at the city Dionysia was described as a victory in the city. The date of the festival can be fixed with a fair amount of certainty. It took place in Elaphebolion, a month which answers to the last half of March and the first half of April. It must have terminated on the 15th and begun on the 10th or 11th. It could have hardly lasted less than 5 days. The long series of performances and celebrations which had to be gone through could not have been packed into a smaller space of time. Whether it extended to 6 days is a point that cannot be determined. Before proceeding to describe the dramatic part of the performances at the city Dionysia, it may be appropriate, first of all, to collect together such information as is attainable concerning the general character of the festival. Dear students, it was held at a time of year when the spring was just commencing and the sea had again become navigable. Occasionally, stormy weather interfered with the proceedings. In the time of Demetrius, the procession through the city was prevented by a heavy fall of snow. But the winter was generally at an end. The city was full of visitors from all parts of Greece. During the period of Athenian supremacy, it was at this season of the year that the allies came to Athens to pay the annual tribute. Ambassadors frequently chose this time for the transaction of public business. Crowds of visitors were also attracted to Athens merely from a desire to see the splendors of the festival. The consequence was that the streets were thronged with strangers, and the city presented an animated appearance, which was a marked contrast to the quietness of the winter festival of the Lania. The Athenians were glad of the opportunity of displaying the magnificence of their city before such a vast concourse of foreign Greeks. The various religious ceremonials, the sacrifices to the gods, the dithyrambs, the tragedies, and the comedies were all calculated to impress strangers with the wealth and public spirit and literary taste of the Athenians. In addition to the ordinary proceedings of the festival, 1 or 2 ceremonies of a striking character were introduced for the express purpose of emphasizing the power of Athens in the eyes of the visitors. At the commencement of the performances, in the theatre, the tribute collected from the allies was solemnly deposited in the orchestra in the presence of the assembled multitude. On the same occasion, the herald made an announcement concerning the crowns which had been bestowed by the foreign states upon Athens or upon Athenian citizens. The crowns were brought forward and laid in the orchestra beside the tribute. By scenes of this kind, the festival was made an occasion for glorifying Athens in the presence of foreign Greeks. In the 4th century, after the fall of the Athenian Empire, the political splendor of the city Dionysia came to an end. But the magnificence of the spectacle and the vastness of the gathering do not seem to have been in any way diminished. Visitors were attracted from all parts of Greece, not by political business, but by the dramatic exhibitions. Demosthenes speaks of the multitudes of strangers who were present, and Aeschylus describes the audience at the city Dionysia as consisting of the whole Greek nation. Though Athens was shorn of her political power, the crowds which continued to attend the festival testified to her unimpaired supremacy in art and literature. Well, on the first day of the festival, there was a grand religious procession in which the ancient statue of Dionysius Eleutherius was carried through the streets with great pomp and ceremony. This statue, according to tradition, belonged originally to the people of Eleutheria, a border town between Attica and Boeotia, but had been afterwards transferred to Athens and placed in the sanctuary at the foot of the Acropolis. The procession was instituted to commemorate this sacred event and to symbolize the introduction of the new cult. Every year, at the commencement of the festival, the image was taken out of its shrine and carried solemnly along the road to Eleutheria as far as a certain temple near the academy. On its return, it followed the same road which it had taken formerly when making its first entrance into Athens. The procession was one of the most brilliant spectacles at the city Dionysia. Athenians of every class, men, women, and even girls, made a point of being present to witness or take part in it. Vast crowds filled the streets, and the casual encounters which took place on these occasions often served as a foundation to the plots of the new comedy. The members of the procession wore brilliantly colored garments and ornaments of gold. Many of them had their faces covered with masks. Some were in chariots. Others walked on foot. Conspicuous among the train of people were the canapheri, young virgins bearing upon their heads the baskets containing the sacrificial implements, and the ephebi with their shields and lances, who acted as an escort to the statue. The choregi to the different choruses were also expected to attend. Demosthenes, when he was a choragus, had a golden crown and mantle made specially for use at the procession. And Alcibiades, on a similar occasion, was dressed in purple and excited much admiration by his beauty. It is not improbable that the performers in the various lyric and dramatic competitions likewise joined the ceremony. Part of the show consisted of the train of victims which were to be sacrificed to Dionysus. Many of these were publicly provided by the state, and many others were offered by the individuals or by different classes of the population. The long succession of varied groups and figures, the brilliant colors, the vast crowds of spectators, and the splendid public buildings of Athens in the background must have combined to form a spectacle of great magnificence. The route followed by the procession led through the marketplace, where a halt was made and a chorus danced and sang in front of the statue of the 12 gods. Then came the march through the city gates along the road to the academy. When the temple was reached, the statue of the god was placed upon a pedestal and the various victims were sacrificed. The rest of the day was spent in feasting and rejoicing. At nightfall, the procession returned to Athens by torchlight, but the sacred image, instead of being restored to its sanctuary, was conveyed to the theatre by the Ephebi and placed in the orchestra in full view of the stage. Here it remained during the rest of the festival, so that the god might enjoy the approaching exhibitions as well as his worshippers. This curious ceremony, the existence of which has been discovered from inscriptions, throws an interesting light on many passages in ancient authors. It gives an additional point to the selection of Dionysus in the frogs as the most experienced and representative of dramatic critics. It explains the proposal of Aristophanes that his rival Cratinus should not attempt authorship any longer, but should turn spectator and sit comfortably in the theatre by the side of Dionysus. And finally, it enables us to understand the denunciations of those later writers who, referring to the gladiatorial combats in the Athenian theatre, they protested against the practice of shedding blood in the very orchestra which the god Dionysus occasionally visited. The entertainments provided in the theatre during the city Dionysia were of two kinds. In the first place, there were the dramatic competitions in which tragedies, comedies, and satiric dramas were exhibited. In the second place, there were the choral competitions, which consisted of performances of dithyrambs to the accompaniment of the flute. It is important not to confuse together the details of these two classes of contest. At the city Dionysia, there were two of these choral competitions, one between choruses of boys and the other between choruses of men. The choruses were called cyclic choruses because of their circular form in which they stood. Each of them was composed of 50 members. There were 5 choruses of boys and 5 choruses of men, and each chorus was supplied by one of the 10 tribes of Attica. In this way, all 10 tribes took part in one or other of the two competitions. The important point to remember in regard to these dithyrambic choruses is that the contest in which they were engaged was essentially a tribal one. In the dramatic competitions, the rivalry was confined to individual poets and choregui. Both choruses and choregui were selected indiscriminately from the whole population, but each dithyrambic chorus represented one of the 10 tribes. Its choragus was a member of that tribe. The singers were exclusively chosen from the same tribe. The victory of the chorus was a victory for the tribe to which it belonged. The prize of victory, the tripod, though presented to the choragus and erected in some public place at his expense, was regarded as appertaining equally to the tribe. In the records of victories with dithyrambic choruses preserved on the inscriptions and elsewhere, the name of the tribe to which the chorus belonged is always given in a prominent position. On the other hand, the records of dramatic victories give merely the names of the choragus, the poet, and the principal actor. There is no mention of any tribe. It follows that the tribes had nothing to do with the dramatic contests. The authority who superintended the whole was the archon, to whom the poets had to bring their plays for reading. If the pieces were accepted and the chorus granted, the citizens who were liable for the choregia undertook at their own cost to practice and furnish for them one chorus each. The poets whose plays were accepted received an honorarium for the state. The state also supplied the regular number of actors and made provision for the maintenance of order during the performances. At the end of the performance, usually 5 persons were chosen by lot from a committee nominated by the Senate to award the prizes, that is, agonothito, and bound them by oath to give their judgment on the plays, the choregui, and the actors. The poet who won the first prize was presented with a crown in the presence of the assembled multitude, the highest distinction that used to be conferred on a dramatic author at Athens. The victorious choragus also received a crown with the permission to dedicate a votive offering to Dionysus. This was generally a tripod which was set up either in the theatre or in the temple of the deity or in the street of tripods, so named from this custom. An inscription put on it recorded the event. The actors in the successful play received prizes of money besides the usual honoraria. From the time of Sophocles, the actors in a play were 3 in number. They had to represent all the parts, those of women included, which involved changing their costume several times during the performance. The 3 actors were distinguished as protagonistes, deuteragonistes, and tritagonistes, according to their importance of their parts. If the piece required a 4th actor, which was seldom the case, the choragus had to provide one. The choragus had also to see to the position and equipment of the persona mutii. In earlier times, it was possible that the persons engaged in the representation did not make a business of their art, but performed gratuitously, as the poets down to the time of Sophocles appeared on the stage. But the dramatic art gradually became a profession, requiring careful preparation and winning general respect for its members as artists. Chief requirements for the procession were distinctness and correctness of pronunciation, especially in declamatory passages, and an unusual power of memory, as there was no prompter in a Greek theatre. An actor had also to be thoroughly trained in singing, melodramatic action, dancing, and play of gesture. The latter was especially necessary, as the use of masks precluded all play of feature. The actors were, according to strict rule, assigned to the poets by lot, yet a poet generally had his special protagonistes on whose peculiar gifts he had his eye in writing the dramatic pieces. The Athenian tragedies began to be known all over the Hellenic world as early as the time of Aeschylus. The first city outside of Attica that had a theatre was Syracuse, where Aeschylus brought out some of his own plays. Scenic contests soon began to appear as part of the religious festivals in various Greek cities and were celebrated in honor of other deities besides Dionysus. It was a habit of Alexander the Great to celebrate almost every considerable event with dramatic exhibitions, and after him, this became the regular custom. A considerable increase in the number of actors was one consequence of the new demand. The actors called themselves artists of Dionysus, and in the larger cities, they formed permanent societies, that is, synodoi, with special privileges including exemption from military service and security in person and property. These companies had a regular organization presided over by a priest of their patron god Dionysus, annually elected from among their members. A treasurer and officers completed the staff. At the time of the festivals, the societies sent out their members in groups of 3 actors with a manager and a flute player to the different cities. Dear students, we now come to the dramatic performances at the city Dionysia. of these, the tragic were far the most important. The city Dionysia was the principal home of the tragic drama, and it was here that the earliest public competitions in tragedy were established. The first contest was held in the year 535 BC, when Thespis, then an old man, took part in the performance and won the crown of victory. Shortly before this period, Pisistratus had returned once more from exile and begun his third and final tyranny. The regulation of tragic contests must therefore have been carried out under his auspices. Some critics, relying on the fact that the city Dionysia is known to have been of comparatively late date, have gone so far as to conjecture that the entire festival was first instituted by Pisistratus. But it seems more reasonable to suppose that it was already in existence and was merely reorganized by him and amplified by the addition of the tragic competitions. As to the character of these early contests, very little can be ascertained. It would be interesting to know whether they were regulated from the first on the same system, which afterwards prevailed during the 5th century. But unfortunately, the records which bear upon the subject are too slight to lead to any definite conclusion. Kyrillus, who began to exhibit in 523, is credited with the composition of 160 plays. If the number is correct, it would show that even in the 6th century, it was customary for each poet to produce several tragedies at each individual festival. Again, Pratinus, the contemporary of Kyrillus, is said to have written 50 plays, of which 32 were satiric dramas. From this statement, we might infer that the relative proportion of tragedies and satiric plays exhibited during this early period was more or less equal than in later times. But the inference is rendered doubtful by the fact that the number of dramas ascribed to Pratinus may represent not the total number which he even wrote, but merely the number which happened to be preserved in his name by the grammarians. When we turn to the 5th century, the information is more complete. Records have been preserved in sufficient quantity to enable us to determine with moderate certainty the regulations as to the number of tragedies and tragic poets at each celebration of the festival. The practice of writing plays in trilogies and tetralogies produced the most profound effect upon the art of Aeschylus. Any inquiry, therefore, into the origin and character of this practice will throw light upon one of the most interesting parts in the history of the Greek drama. It is also remarkable that it was a great distinction for a poet to be permitted to even exhibit at one of the annual festivals, and that he only received this permission after being chosen by the Archon from a long list of rival applicants. In the second place, the records show that each poet was expected to exhibit 3 tragedies and a satiric play. This inference is confirmed by a statement in Laertius by Diogenes. The practice of terminating the tragic pieces with the boisterous license of the satiric drama is also rampant. There is an important suggestion to Ion of Chios, the tragic poet of the 5th century, that like a tragic poet's group of plays, they should always contain a satiric element. It is noticeable that on one occasion, Euripides substituted the Alcestis, a short tragedy with a tinge of comedy about it, for the usual satiric drama. This may have been frequently the case, especially during the latter half of the 5th century. Thank you.